Something doesn't feel right. Much better. It began on an island, and with a name that had already meant something for a generation before this moment was ever filmed. To tell the whole story, we have to go back long before WWE, before even the Apple, before any of it. Welcome to the Tea Drop, where the brew is strong and there's lots to talk about. This Sunday, June 14th, in New York City marks the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And in that spirit, this is a deep, or at least to my extent, a deep dive into the most accomplished wrestling family the island ever produced, the Colóns. Over the next few minutes, we're going to trace the whole arc. A patriarch who built an empire from nothing, the promotion that became a national institution, a second generation that carried the name onto the world's biggest stage, and a legacy that 3 generations on is still being written. Now, the story starts in Santa Isabel on the southern coast of Puerto Rico. Carlos Colón Sr. didn't come from wrestling money or a wrestling family. He trained, he traveled, he learned the craft the hard way, across territories, across the toughest hands in the business, and what he understood early was something most performers on his era missed, that Puerto Rico, his home, didn't have a wrestling promotion to call its own. The biggest stars passed through. They didn't stay, they didn't build. Carlos Colón decided he would be the one to change that. That decision is the seed everything in this story grows from. To grasp what Carlos became, you have to watch him work. Let's start from here, 1982. This is Colón's sharing a ring with Ric Flair, the NWA World Champion at that time, and fighting him to a draw on his home soil. Understand what that meant. The man considered the best in the world on the island, unable to put Carlos Colón away. Now, we can watch this one too. Stan Hansen, one of the most feared brawlers wrestling has ever produced, a man who terrified locker rooms around the globe. Colón stood across from him and gave the crowd a war. And this, a Texas death match with Hercules Ayala, this is the kind of bout that defined Puerto Rican wrestling. Physical, emotional, no easy way out. A Carlos Colón main event wasn't simply a show for most. For the island, it was an event. One that filled stadiums and held the attention of an entire island. By the end of his career, he'd be recognized as a 26-time world champion. And in 2014, the body of work was honored with an induction to the WWE Hall of Fame. Yet, and this is the heart of it, his most enduring contribution would not be measured in championships. It would be measured in what he built and who he raised. In the early 1970s, Carlos Colón co-founded World Wrestling Council, or for many, the WWC, and gave Puerto Rico its own wrestling institution. This is where we are going to really look into this history because it's very important for the topic of today. Because what happened next is one of the most underrated success stories in the history of the business. While the wider industry centered on the major markets of North America and Japan, Puerto Rico sustained one of the most passionate wrestling cultures anywhere on earth. The footage you're seeing from that world. Crowd packed wall to wall, an energy you simply could not manufacture. WWC didn't just exist for everyone. It thrived through it. It developed its own homegrown stars. It even drew the biggest international names there. Flair, Hansen, Abdullah, the legends of the era all came through the island. And the centerpiece, year after year, was Carlos Colón. Think about what that means. A promotion run from a small Caribbean island holding its own against the giants of the sport. For decades. That's really not luck in my opinion. That is him fulfilling a vision. And it made the Colón name carry a weight that long preceded any of his sons stepping through the ropes. The empire came first, and then, eventually, the dynasty would be developed next. Now, we're halfway through this part, If this story meant something to you this week, if you got the Boricua pride, or you just love wrestling history, take a second to tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue to the next generation of WWC. Now, before the world ever saw the infamous Apple, Carlos' son learned the craft where it all started, in WWC, the promotion his father built. This footage is from 2003, I believe, Carlito brawling with Sabu in Puerto Rico. Years before any WWE call came, a son being forged in his father's ring, in front of his father's crowd, carrying his father's name. You don't get more authentic wrestling education than that. So when WWE came calling in 2004, Carlito wasn't some prospect they were hoping to develop. He was a finished product, and he proved it immediately because of what he did on night one. On his main roster debut in 2004, Carlito defeated John Cena for the United States Championship on his debut. That's an introduction almost no performer in history gets, and he carried it with the ease of someone who's been raised inside the business, because he's had been. What follows, though, was a decade of Caribbean cool, United States champion, Intercontinental champion, a tag team run, and one of the most effortlessly charismatic acts of his era. The apple, the leather, the slow walk, and the cocky grin. It looked easy because the foundation underneath it was rock solid, and he was never the only one. His brother Primo and his cousin Epico became WWE Tag Team Champions in their own right. Later reinvented as Los Matadores, stop and consider that. Where most wrestling families are lucky to produce a single star, the Colóns put an entire roster on WWE television. All of them representing the same island, the same name, and the same legacy. In 2021, Carlito came back to WWE for a celebrated late career run, the veteran returning to a roster that grew up watching him. And then in 2025, the story came full circle in the most poetic way possible. Carlito went home, and he won the WWC Puerto Rico Championship in the very promotion his father founded. Think about that for a sec. The same promotion, the same island, a belt that carried the family's history, lifted by the next generation. The boy who learned to wrestle in his father's ring came back as its champion. There aren't many stories in this entire sports that close the loop that cleanly. And it's more than a booking situation, it's about the bloodline. But here's the context a true dive demands when we talk about these type of stories. The Colóns didn't rise in a vacuum. They rose from rich soil. Long before them, Pedro Morales became the first Triple Crown champion in WWE history, a Hall of Famer who held the company's world title at a time when it was among the most prestigious prizes on earth. A Puerto Rican icon who broke through decades before Carlito ever picked up an apple. In the Attitude Era, we had Savio Vega carry the island's banner onto national television week after week. And there were others, a steady stream of talent flowing from one small island onto the biggest stages in the world. Seen in that light, the Colón family's achievement came into sharper focus. Puerto Rico has consistently produced talent far beyond what its size should allow. The island doesn't just create those wrestlers, it also created some champions and made Hall of Famers, and it made history. And no family embodies that truth more completely than the Colóns. And so the story returns to this week. When the parade fills the streets of New York and the flags are raised high, it carries the same pride that Carlos Colón once built a stadium upon. The same pride Carlito brought into the WWE ring with nothing more than an apple and a smile. 3 generations, one island, one name the entire wrestling world learned to recognize and respect. From a kid in Santa Isabel who decided his home deserved its own promotion, to a Hall of Fame career, to an empire in WWC, to sons and cousins who conquered WWE, to a homecoming title win that closed the full circle. The Colóns stand as proof that the size of the place you come from has never once determined the size of the mark you leave on the world. This week, that legacy is worth celebrating, and very loudly. Now that's a deep dive on the Colons. As always, drop your thoughts in the comments. What is your favorite Colon moment, or the Puerto Rican wrestlers you believe deserve more recognition? And as always, if the tea hit right, hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.